Hey, this is Michael Sam 9 on my little YouTube channel, Michael Sam 9. I've got Don Harrold here, and I'm going to ask him some questions. Hi, Don.
Hey, Michael, how are you?
Okay. First question. What do you want U.S. residents to do right now to help themselves and the economy?
Well, that's kind of a big question. I mean, the first thing people need to do, and this is the best investment anyone can do, I think, is just get out of debt in whatever way possible. But I just think that debt is the absolute destroyer of independence and liberty and freedom. And so I don't think you can do anything effectively if you're in debt. The second thing is commit not to take on any future debt. Getting off the crack pipe is one thing. Promising not to pick it up again is another. And it's a hard habit to break. And I've discovered in my own life that it's been a more difficult road to travel down than I ever would have dreamed. Debt is sort of like, plastic stuff from China. It's everywhere. And it seems like just about everything you do these days, you're tempted to take on debt to do it. But I would argue, get out of debt and commit not to take on any new debt. And next, I would find a way to make more money tomorrow than you did today in some fashion. Again, it applies differently to different people, but you got to find a way to get ahead somehow, some way. The system is rigged. It's difficult, but you're going to have to find a way to make more tomorrow than you did today. Or you want to make sure that you start living within your means. And again, these are general. I mean, I could do whole video seminars on each of these topics. Living within your means might mean one thing to one person and one to the next. If you're bringing in $1,000 a month, you better find a way to live on that $1,000 a month. If you're bringing in $10,000 a month, the same. Finally, I think that everyone needs hard assets. I think that you need to have a way to do everything from generate your own water supply. There are different products that can do that. Grow your own food. Store up wealth with precious metals. And I've said many times in the past, if I go to the grocery store and they offer me a choice between paper and plastic, I'm going to take paper because you can burn paper in your fireplace if you need to. I mean, that's how specific I am to wanting, to own hard assets over things without any real value. These are the building block, the foundational things that I think people ought to do.
I think we both want to get rid of the Fed, but how do we do that short of an economic collapse, or is one necessary?
The Fed is just a name, okay? The entity, their purpose ostensibly is to do something noble. The ostensible purpose of the Federal Reserve, stable prices, stable employment, basically keep things smooth running in the economy. That's something which is a noble sounding purpose. And the Constitution was written in such a way that the founders knew that you would need a body that would regulate those sorts of things. And that body in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution is the Congress. Now, the Congress can delegate that authority to whomever they wish. And if they want to delegate it to something called the Federal Reserve, or they can sit in the back room somewhere with calculators and spreadsheets and do it themselves. But the need for a body to control the issuance of currency is something the Founding Fathers wanted. The real problem with the Federal Reserve is the interest that is owed the Federal Reserve and the autonomy under which it operates to then arbitrarily create interest and debt-based money. So I don't know that getting rid of the Fed in name is the problem. I think it's the interest-based money that we all have. So get rid of the interest on the money, and I think we have a system that might be workable. The Federal Reserve is it is so ingrained in our economy and so ingrained in who we are as a people and how everything for the last 100 years has operated, that getting rid of it will be an extremely long, protracted process that isn't going to be something that a guy like me on YouTube is going to have the answer to. Ron Paul doesn't have the answer, or more correctly, whatever the answers have been discussed haven't worked, and I don't have the answer on how you get rid of the Fed, which is why instead of focusing on getting rid of the Federal Reserve, which people a lot smarter than me can figure out, I'm interested in having or teaching people how to live within the system as it currently exists.
The other part of the question was about, do we need an economic collapse to really get some kind of...
Well, we have an economic collapse. We don't need... If an economic collapse was what was needed to get rid of that system, we've already had that. It was called the Great Depression. It's called 1975 to 1980. It's called 2007 until now. That doesn't do it. I mean, in fact, that's part of the system. That's how the system works. Thomas Jefferson said 200 years ago, by inflating and deflating, when private banks own the currency, property ownership will transfer to banks. And that's what's happening. So, I mean, having a crisis and having a collapse, that's part of the design of the system. Whether or not it was explicitly designed that way or just by happenstance, that's the result of what we've got right now. So I don't know that a collapse will change anything. In fact, a collapse, you might even argue, well, in fact, no, you don't need to argue it. The truth is, the collapse is why we were told the Fed needed more powers back in 2008. So I don't know. I mean, more of a collapse might just bring on more of the same. I don't know.
What would you want the next president, assuming there's going to be one, and I personally don't, what would you want the next president to do first?
I think the main thing I would want any president to do is to look at the Constitution and follow what the Constitution wants for our country and what our founding fathers wanted, and just apply the Constitution and understand that we're a country ruled by laws and not men, and let's start acting like it. As far as specific legislation is concerned, there's 100 different things I can think of that I would do or I'd want a president to do, but it starts with the Constitution.
What do you think of Ron Paul for president?
I think that Ron Paul is a guy whose heart is in the right place. I think that Ron Paul is a guy, when he speaks about liberty and freedom in the Constitution, has his brain in the right place. So a guy with his heart and brain in the right place is probably a guy that I'd like to have as president. But it's a long road to the White House, and I think that people expecting Ron Paul to win, it would be very difficult to think that Ron Paul would win. I don't think that Ron Paul has the same sort of political... someone I know recently said Ron Paul is not as much of a hockey player as he needs to be. You know, he's just not tough enough to get in there and really duke it out. As much as what Ron Paul talks about, I think, is a delightful, refreshing change from the usual political rhetoric, I just don't know that he has a chance. I'm not a very good political pundit because I have not picked a political race right in a long time. So,
does China fit into what happens in the U.S., and if so, how?
Well, I think that when you have a country that is the largest country by population in the world, and they also are the largest provider of, whether you like it or not, goods on your continent, I think that you got to pay attention to that. And so obviously they do have a large say in what happens with us, with other countries around the world. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think that certainly if China wants it, China's probably going to get it. So at the moment, we're kind of beholden to China. But there's really nothing new. If you go back to the founding of our country, you know, the term, the price of tea in China comes from the fact that the East India Tea Company was serving tea to the continent here that was from China. China's always been involved, and until proven otherwise, they're always going to be involved.
What about the new exchange? They're calling it PAGE, the Pan-Asian Gold Exchange. Is that a game changer at all? The fact that in October, Chinese citizens are going to be able to buy gold on the international market in their currency.
Well, I think certainly the idea is that will push gold prices higher, and that's going to be an amazing bull run for gold, and that you better jump on board. I mean, that is the sentiment, but it's not a story that's new. It's not a story that's unknown, and it's not a story that I would one way or the other particularly bank on pushing prices higher. I have my doubts about precious metals prices for a lot of reasons, and any one particular fundamental story, I could make the case one way or the other, and I don't know. I mean, it's a game changer in that people will be able to trade it, but for every person that wants to buy, there's going to be someone that wants to sell. So now, you know, if you believe, I mean, if you believe that there's the supply of gold is such that no matter how many people want to sell, there are more buyers than there would be sellers, then that should be theoretically very bullish for precious metals prices. But that is a whole other longer conversation that I really don't know the answer to. There are people a lot more qualified to answer that than me.
Well, is there anything else that you would particularly like to talk about?
I would ask that people, you know, if they make decisions with respect to the economy or the government or politics or whatever, they would do some research on their own, and they'd find out for themselves. They'd go beyond YouTube. They'd go beyond, interviews on YouTube. They'd start looking and ask themselves fundamental questions. How do you think we got here as an economy? You know, what if the things that we want don't come to pass? How will we live in an economy that might not be the way that we want? I mean, look, you have to ask yourself, what if the debt-based money system doesn't change for the next 100 years? People are still going to have to find a way to live, you know, with that system. So I would just hope that people would find a way to live in that system and understand that change sometimes takes an awful long time. And we may be at a time in history when change takes an awful long time. And it may not be overnight. It might not even be in our generation. You know, it might be our grandkids who see the sorts of change that we want. But if your family is in debt, if your family is up to your eyeballs in hock to anybody, you cannot be an effective, parent or friend or co-worker or teacher or anything if you're constantly struggling. You can't serve two masters. So if you're struggling and spending all your time shoveling money into a black hole of debt, that's time and energy you should spend towards the future. And I'll give you I think, a pretty interesting analogy here. Over the next, let's say, 20 years or 30 years, if someone listening to me goes out and buys a house, and by buy I mean takes a loan for a house, what if instead of doing that, you'll effectively spend triple the money in interest on living in that house? What if you took that money and simply every month got yourself an apartment and took the other money and put it somewhere in a box or in a hole or in a CD or in the bank or something, or precious metals or whatever, just somewhere, okay? What if you put that money so that, say, 30 years down the road, as you're, turning the key on your apartment one night, when your grandkids show up at your house, you can hand to them a big bundle of silver, or you can hand to them your time because you're free and don't owe anybody. Or you can spend your money on things that will help educate your family, or pay for your kids' college education with cash if you want to. Why not do those things? There are all sorts of things people can do that in any economy will help not just them, but generations that come after them. So whatever you got to do in your life to help your friends and your family and your future family, that's what I hope people will do. And that, to me, that's what this is all about. I don't have any particular, I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know where we're going to be as an economy tomorrow, a year from now, or a decade, or 30 or 40 or 50 years. But if the pattern continues the way it is, then you're going to want to make sure you do what I said at the beginning. Get out of debt. Don't take on more debt. Make more money tomorrow than today. Find a way to get some hard assets, and that's a whole other long story there. And live within your means. If people do that, I think that the country might not go the way we want, but at least our individual homes can be the best that they can be.